much chance do you think Ms. Merkel and her party, 3 weeks from now, the election?
Well, it looks like Angela Merkel is very well equipped to win this election. There is hardly any doubt that she's going to come out as leader of the strongest party. The key question probably is with whom she's going to govern. Another grand coalition or a coalition with a rather smaller coalition partners, the Liberals, the FDP, or the Greens. However, the most important takeaway from the TV debate is probably that Martin Schulz is most likely not going to be the next German chancellor.
Agree with that, Mr. Rittelmeyer?
Yeah, I fully agree with that. We are almost sure that Angela Merkel is going to be re-elected for a fourth term. And the main question is going to be, indeed, what score exactly will the four smaller party have? And this will determine the coalition, and then it will shape German policy.
The German election process results in a seat distribution that is very close to the proportions of the national popular vote. Merkel's CDU and the coalition with the Christian Socialist Union should remain the largest bloc. The latest poll also show Merkel CDU CSU bloc winning 40% of Bundestag seats and Schulz SPD winning 24%. AfD, who don't even have a single seat in the parliament, are expected to get 9%. Left-leaning parties, the Left, Greens, and Free Democratic Party are polling at 9%, 9%, and 8% respectively. A 50% majority could be reached if Merkel form a coalition with both the Greens and the FDP. Okay, a lot of politics about Germany. Gentlemen, you have to help us to explain all of this. What about these two parties? What exactly are the major points of their campaign? Together, what is the common ground between Merkel's party and these two? Mr. Lochocki.
Well, one of the defining features of German politics is that the polarization and the polemics which we see from other Western European democracies, France, the UK, or the United States, is not to be found here. The two major parties, the SPD, center-left, and the center-right, CDU, CSU, more or less agree on most issues, most certainly foreign policy and European politics. This is also an explanation why they are not as strong as they could be, because they struggle to mobilize their voters. The smaller parties, the ones you just mentioned, have a very clear-cut policy alternative formulated to the two big parties. And the question how German politics will be waged in the foreseeable future will depend who or which of these smaller parties will join the next coalition. And this coalition will then decide German policies.
Right. But at the same time, Mr. Rittelmeyer, it is no doubt if Chancellor Merkel become once again the chancellor after this election with the coalition that she's likely to build with the party and some of the others, she's going to be the fourth time there. That is so rare a phenomenon, I would say, in European politics, in German politics as well. What would that mean?
Well, this will be impressive, and she will be equaling her father in politics, Helmut Kohl, our spiritual father. Well, this is just reflecting the German state of mind and the state of Germany. Germany is going well economically. Germans are aspiring to stability in a very troubled environment internationally, with Trump's election, with threats coming from North Korea, with internal threats in the EU, with the Brexit, with Ebola risk developing in several countries. The Germans have with Chancellor Merkel an anchor of stability that provides continuity. So when things are going quite well, why not just continuing?
Interesting, but at the same time, both of you know Chancellor Merkel very smooth in her transitional policies and transition of opinions. She could say here one thing today while changing it smoothly to another thing tomorrow. But the voters, you know what, are very happy with that. They are not challenging her about her change of positions over the days, weeks, and months. How would you make How should you understand that phenomenon, Mr. Lochocki?
Well, this is not exactly true. There are a lot of German voters which do not agree with these opinion swings of her, which is one of the prime reasons why there is a new party forming. The German Alternative for Germany is currently polling at 10%, which is, you might say, an historical exception, because in Germany there tends to be no far right. So Angela Merkel's, say, swift changes of policies led to a certain percentage of German voting strata to be disenchanted with the governing conservatives, and they now flock to the AfD. However, you rightfully pointed out, the majority of German voters is very happy with the chancellor's style, which is probably due to her managing the current crisis rather well.
Well, Mr. Rittelmeyer, you know, the refugee crisis, for example, has been one of the latest, the biggest challenge for Chancellor Merkel. I mean, she was pretty much pro it. Refugees come over to Germany, let's just be a family. But later, of course, things have changed. Do you think she is making smooth transition in that regard? And what would this kind of changing of attitude be a lesson or be a plus for her in the election?
I think that integrating refugees is a fundamental challenge for Germany's future, but the situation has calmed down over the summer. Illegal immigration seems to be more under control, and we don't see major differences between the main German parties on this issue. German citizens and party would like to get more support from other EU member states regarding the refugees, but then we see some slight differences between the party, except if we look at the more radical parties, so Alternative for Germany and the radical left, but the other parties converge on this issue, and this is why Martin Schulz had so many difficulties to really differentiate himself from Angela Merkel during the whole campaign.
One of the things people have been talking about outside Germany is there has been a lack of challengers for Chancellor Merkel over the decade when she is in power. Some say, what is happening to German politics? Others say, well, probably Germany is just doing very well, you know, and everybody say, well, if she's there, Germany's well, let her be. Which do you think is actually the real picture? Has the German political system been able to churn out new talents and new thoughts? Let's go to Mr. Lochocki first.
Well, what you kind of insinuate on is that the German system would be incapable of political change. That's not true. What you currently see is that the CDU-CSU is a party which is extremely successful to offer, say, an atmosphere in which a lot of German people feel quite comfortable in. What we should not forget is that up until 10 years ago, the German economy was in very dire shape. Germany was referred to as the sick man of Europe up until the mid-2000s. So in the last decade, the economic revival of Germany for Germans is an exception and not the normality. And now a lot of Germans associate these economically benign times with the current CDU-CSU government. And this setting, this alignment of political stars, if you will, is an extreme advantage to the CDU-CSU and Angela Merkel, and extremely difficult for any challenger from any party, you might say, to branch in this phalanx of good news the CDU-CSU can convey on a daily basis.
Right. It is the economy is stupid, as a quote was so popularly used for decades, right? It is about the economy, but at the same time, Mr. Rittelmeyer, what has she done right? What do you think should be the brief list that should, you know, be put under Chancellor Merkel and say she has done this right?
Well, I think it's the economy, but it's also the characteristic of German politics, which is made of consensus and building coalitions, and the fact that parties are also moving a lot to the center, and Merkel especially has been moving her own party, the Christian Democrats, a lot to the center. And then, as you said, there is a question, what's going to come next if we have another grand coalition? We are still not sure we are going to have another grand coalition, because the SPD will be quite reluctant, and especially party members will be quite reluctant to enter in another coalition in which they would be the junior partner and then probably suffering at elections because of this status. Martin Schulz looked like almost a perfect challenger against Angela Merkel, because he was an outsider. He was coming from the EU scene. He was not involved in the coalition government. He wasn't in German politics when Gerhard Schröder did the tough reforms. He looked at the perfect challenger, and we had a surge in the polls in favor of his party just after they nominated him. But we have seen that then he really had difficulties during the campaign facing Angela Merkel, who is really West established.
Mr. Lochocki, you know what? Germany has been described as a, let's just say, reluctant leader of the European Union or of Europe, and yet very active global player. How should we understand these descriptions about Germany under Angela Merkel when she is in power? And will that characteristics continue as we see ever more disintegration possibly of the European Union, and as we see the international system, international player list have also been on the move, or rather changed? Mr. Lochocki.
Well, Germany's economy and Germany's defense and Germany's international alliances always benefit from German diplomacy. That means that the geographical position of Germany obliges almost to look for diplomacy as the first choice, which means that any German chancellor will try to forge alliances, try to strike a middle ground with its most important allies, which of course means that the European partners come first. The most important partner here is France and then the United States. Meaning that in the current time that the French had some difficulties to get their power on the road, as you can say, the Germans were very cautious, not being too adamant, being too fearful with their newly ascribed leadership role, because they feel way better when they lead with partners, especially with the French. Which means that currently, after the French elections, the Germans will now wait for President Emmanuel Macron to help them to forge the new European Union in a strong Franco-German tandem. And this, you might say, is regardless of whom is leading Germany.
Well,
Germany will look to France and the United States as the prime partners.
What you might say, yes, France, United States, but look at the two presidents of the two countries. One is supporting rating is really going down since the election time in France, for example, and in the United States, you know the political debate and the chaos going on. So when you say Germany wants to look at these two partners and let them take the lead and Germany will follow and cooperate, that's not likely to happen. So Mr. Rittelmeyer, in that circumstances, what's likely to be the choice of Germany? What do you think the public will want the Chancellor Merkel to do if a coalition government is being formed?
Well, if it's Merkel or Schulz, but as we said, it's probably going to be almost certain going to be Chancellor Merkel.
Yeah.
Well, the main German parties are very similar position on foreign policy. Germans know they have to take more responsibility in the world and in the euro, and German approach is not based on hard power. It relies on diplomacy, on multilateral framework, and in this regard, the EU channel is an essential one for the Germans, and especially as my colleague just said, a strong relationship with France will be essential to shape the future of the EU. So we will see very soon after the German election proposal coming from France regarding the future of the euro and especially the future of the eurozone. And the results of the German election are not going to change a lot how Germany will reply to such position.
I see. Before we go, I do want to invite both of your insights about, from now until the election, 3 weeks ago, a lot of things could happen. Ratings sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes just, crisis happen from time to time. It would change the picture. What is likely, do you think, the chance once again for Chancellor Merkel and her party? And eventually, where do you think after this election Germany is moving to politically wise? Let's go to Mr. Lochocki first. 30 seconds for you. Only 30 seconds, sir.
It's hardly imaginable that anything happens which can really challenge Angela Merkel. The question is with whom she's going to govern. And I think given the proximity of German parties, German foreign policies will remain very steady regardless of the outcome of the coalition formation.
Very steady, Mr. Rittelmeyer?
Well, I also think not much can happen during these 3 weeks. Then after the elections, it could end up being a complicated situation if the SPD, for example, does not want again to join a grand coalition, or if the conservative, so the Christian Democrats of Angela Merkel and the liberals are not able to have a majority. If we have to experiment for the first time a 3-party coalition at federal level, then it will be very challenging for these parties.